This conference will now be recorded.
Right. So, any questions, guys, before I get started? Anyone, any questions? We'll just give like about a couple of minutes to take questions and then get started. Anyone, anything out here? Okay. So, until now, we've been, creating resource groups. We know how to create a resource group right now. We know how to create a storage account. We know how to create a container inside a storage account, upload the data, and then we looked at things like, let's say, how do you, let's say, go and change the access tier from, let's say, private to a container level or a blob level. And then we also saw about what is hot, cool, and how do you, let's say, use something called as lifecycle management and all these things out here research. All this is something that we have been interacting with the Azure portal and doing. So what we did is that we went into the Azure portal, we logged into the Azure portal, and then we started creating all our resources like a resource group, storage account, containers inside a storage account, and so on and so forth. But when you start working in a real-time environment, right, working on the Azure portal becomes a little tedious. Why is it tedious? Why is it difficult? The reason being, your requirements are not straightforward. When you're working with a client, the requirement that the client gives you is not a straightforward, let's say, ask. Meaning, let's say that you are starting your day at 9 a.m. in the morning. So you are starting to work in an office. The client comes to you and he says, you know what? I want you to go and create a resource group. So what you can do is simply come to the Azure portal and you say create a resource group and you ask questions like, you know what, can you tell me what is the location of a resource group in which a resource group is created, or what is the name of the resource group? Can you give me those things? I'll just go ahead, create this out, and so on and so forth. So it'll take like about a minute to create one resource group. I'm telling 1 minute out here. And says, okay, fine, great, you've done a great job. We created a resource group. Can you create one more resource group for me? You'll say, okay, fine, that's not a big problem. I'll just go ahead, create one more resource group out here. Great, good enough. Can you please call mute, guys? Ravi Radha, can you please call mute? Okay. So they come to you and say that, okay, fine, you know what, can you create two more resource groups? So three more resource groups. So again, see, resource group is not a big difficult task at all. I can simply go ahead, say create it on the Azure portal. Will take me a minute or so. Help me, create the resource groups. Done. I'm done. I'm good with that. It'll take me about 3 minutes or so. So three RGs right now I have. Now the client is coming back to you and telling, okay, fine, great. Now under each and every resource group, can you create a storage account? Storage account, which gives you how many? Three different storage accounts, which gives you around three different storage accounts that needs to be created. Again, each and every storage account, right? Now storage account is a little, let's say, difficult resource to create as compared to a resource group, because the amount of information that you need to give there is a lot. Meaning you will have to take care of the storage account name, you'll have, you'll have to take care of the storage account region, you'll have to take care of the replication type, is it LRS, GRS, whatever it is. And then you'll have to tell whether it's a hot access tier, cool access tier, whatever it is. So let's imagine that each and every storage account is taking around 5 minutes of time, and I'm telling that there are three storage accounts, one under each particular resource group out here, which is going to take you how many? 15 minutes. So you will say, okay, fine, not a problem. I just started my work. I'll start creating, let's say, each and every storage account out here. You take around 15 minutes and you go ahead and take the requirement from the client, understand what you want to create. You create it out. Great. Client says, okay, fine, great. You have created this out. Now, under each storage, I want 20 containers. The requirement is slightly now, let's say, increasing. The complexity is slightly now increasing, which means 20 containers into three storage accounts, which will give you around what? 60 containers. I am roughly telling that for a particular container, you need to take 1 minute to go and understand what is the access level and etc. Take it and create, which gives you what? 60 minutes here. 60 minutes right now. So you take around 5 minutes initially, 15 minutes, then 60 minutes later. Time is increasing. Also, don't you think it is a very manual work in nature? Because it's very manual. You'll have to just click on add, then create, click on add, create. You're spending a lot of time out here in this entire manual work. You could have done something else. You could have done something productive. You could have actually, gone ahead and done some R&D. You could have done something else. Not a problem. You said 60 minutes, took a 60 minutes. Client is giving you that 60 minutes. You're good with that. And let's say that after this 60 minutes, they come back and tell you that, under each and every container, I need to upload 10 different blobs. Because containers, we are creating a container to hold the data, right? It's not an empty container that we are doing. We need to hold some data out here. So now you have how many? 60 containers, 10 blobs under each and every container, which gives you how many? 600 different types of data that you need to now upload and store. Now I'm not really concerned about the time. It might take how many ever hours, that's okay. Yes, based on, let's say, the size and all these things, I'm good with that. But now I'm also considered about the accuracy. Which 10 blob needs to go under which container? How do I need to upload this out? What kind of a blob that needs to go? So again, hook or crook, you take one whole day, you understand what is the mapping of the blob versus the container, you upload everything, you say everything is good. And it's telling, okay, fine, my testing is done, delete everything. So you just come here, take your resource groups, delete everything out here. So everything is now vanished. Deleted. Now the client is very happy. They tested it out. They tested the application is working and all these things out. Now they say that, okay, fine, we need to do one more testing. Can you again recreate the same thing out here? Next day. Which means that the idea that you have right now from the Azure portal is not repeatable. Which means once you delete it, there is no way that you can recreate it in a second. You'll have to again go ahead, take the same time for three resource groups, storage accounts, containers, blobs, upload everything, recreate everything out here. Again, you will take one whole day. Now, this is not what a business wants. A business wants something which is quick, something which is reusable. Meaning, today I'm doing something, I want to reuse the same thing, let's say in the future, down the lane, 60 days from now, I want to reuse all these things out because I might want to delete all these things and recreate it again because of my testing purposes, because of my use cases and all that stuff. That's the reason portal is not a preferable way to go ahead and create a resources. Azure portal is not really a preferable way. Until now, that's what we've been seeing, right? We've been understanding how to create a portal because the issue here is that I cannot start automation right in the day one because you won't understand what is a resource group. You won't understand what is a storage account. So if I put all that knowledge inside you right in the first day, it would be simply a simple bouncer out there. You won't be able to understand what are we really trying to create out here as such. But what happened is because of this particular reason, let's okay, uh, let's put people mute. Okay. Because of this particular reason that you see on my screen is that I want something which is a repeatable solution, which means that I want to automate this particular creation, meaning I just need to have one simple script and in a click of a button, I need three resource groups, let's say one storage account each, 10 containers, and then go ahead and let's say upload the blobs. I need to do all these things out here just at a click of one button. It might take an hour, not a problem. But in that 1 hour, I am not going to go into the portal and touch anything. I can do something else, right? I can just run my script in the background. I can do something else. I can help my client in somewhere else. So what I'm trying to do is that whatever work that I'm doing, I'm trying to automate my work so that it's an intelligent solution that I'm giving, let's say an intelligent solution that I'm creating and selling it across to a client out here as such. This is what I want to do. Now, earlier, when Azure came into picture, right, used to call this as an Azure Classic model. Used to be an Azure Classic model out here, and Azure Classic model did not support any kind of automation, or the support for automation was very less. Was not there, I could say. And the resources that you create in the Azure portal were called Azure Classic resources, Classic model out here. They're not using it anymore these days, and that's where you have things like storage account general purpose v1 version 1. Version 1 is a classic storage account. Today what we are using is called Azure Resource Manager. ARM model. An ARM model that we're using right now, which has a lot of scope to, let's say, automate resources. And resources that you create under an ARM model are called version 2, like general purpose storage account version 2, version 2, version 1, and all these things. So version 1 support is not really that great these days in a lot of users. Not, I would say, a lot. Almost 99.99% of the customers use ARM model only because of the advantages it has and all these things out. And in an ARM model, you can interact, of course, with the Azure portal using a link called portal.azure.com. Portal.azure.com, you can go to the link, log in, and do a manual interaction. So manual interactions are supported. Also, Azure is now available, or Azure now is exposed itself, telling that okay, fine, you can also use some kind of an automation tool like PowerShell, CLI, command line interface, Bash scripting, shell scripting, or if you are from a program, or if you, let's say, are from a programming background, you can use something like a .NET or Java or Python classes in order to interact with Azure portal out here. Or if you want something better, you can go for something called Azure Resource Manager templates, ARM templates, or something called as Terraforms. All these are something which is now available. Go ahead and interact with the Azure portal out here right now. Meaning all these are the options in order to replace the manual interaction or the manual intervention, whatever you're trying to do manually. Meaning, I'm asking you to create 10 different resource groups right now. I don't want you to create it manually. I simply want you to take a go ahead, have a script in the background, have, let's say, something called as a template in the background, just execute it, and that itself should create it. So if that is creating it, what what does it mean to me is that firstly, I don't have to spend so much of time to go ahead and, let's say, into the Azure portal and understand what I need. My script can do that for me, and every time I'll create the same thing with absolute accuracy. Accuracy is also something that I, let's say, I need to now have an idea about, and that's what we are, let's say, looking at. And we are looking at the the very firstly we are looking at something called PowerShell, on how do you use something called as a tool called PowerShell in order to interact with the Azure portal. And in order to understand this tool, you will have to understand the language called PowerShell. It's not a programming language, it's a scripting language. There is a very wide difference between what is a program and what is a script. We'll talk about that. So we will need to understand something called as PowerShell scripting in order to make sure that you interact with your portal not manually but automatically. And believe me, guys, the industry today is very diverse right now. Meaning, a lot of people are not really looking out for a skill set of manual interaction, because everyone now knows that the requirement is really dynamic. The cloud industry really is today is dynamic. So at some point of the other in your career, as a DevOps engineer or as a cloud engineer or as an administrator, to be precise, you will need some of the other tools. Portal is something that you can always go ahead and, let's say, interact with it. It's very simple, straightforward. But having a knowledge of PowerShell or ARM or Terraform, or if you are coming from a, let's say, program background, .NET, Java, or something like that, one of this is now become a mandate. Any profile you take, any DevOps engineering profile you take, you have one of these things out here as such, telling that okay, fine, this is how you interact and all these things out here as such. Yes, any questions till here before we get started with what PowerShell really is? Anything till here on why do we need this? So until now, I have explained why do we need this. I'll say how do we use it. We'll talk about that. But until here, any questions till here?
So we can assume version one are all manual and version two is automation. Okay.
Kind of. Version one also did support automation, but very, very less amount of automation out there. So version one was
What
very
is this
manual.
version one? I mean, what is all it relates to? It's not only storage account, right? It relates to version
Relates
one
to
with
virtual machines, virtual. It relates to, let's say,
everything.
virtual machines called classic. Yes, everything. Everything is in a classic mode.
Okay, classic
Very
and
limited.
version two is yeah. Version two is what?
Version two is ARM model, Azure Resource Manager model out here.
Okay.
So version 2 is the resource manager.
I
So again,
mean,
even when you create a storage account or something, right? Azure does give you a classic support also these days, but it's very less. So for example, let's say I go here, it's telling if you want to create a legacy storage account type, please click here. This will now create something known as a classic storage account out here. Again, you can put a
this is
general
about
purpose
storage,
version
right? Okay.
about storage. Yes, this is an example of storage. So I cannot really give you an example of an let's say virtual machine
Virtual
right
machine.
now. Yes,
Hmm.
as of this point, I won't be able to give that because we do not really cover what is a virtual machine. But
Right.
yes,
So just want to
resources.
understand, I mean,
Yes.
what is
Mhm.
that it is missing or what is it is added in version 2 from version 1?
Automation. Version 1 doesn't really support automation. Version 2 does support automations out there. So automating resources, interacting with resources over a command line, that's something that will miss in version 1 out there.
So which means the modules and command lights and whatever required are built in
Hmm.
with version 2, is it?
It's correct. That support is built in version 2 out here as such.
Okay.
Is any more questions,
So
guys?
Kiran, regarding the versions, yeah.
Hmm.
So regarding these versions, how will we know that Microsoft Azure is releasing the new versions where we can see that versioning, and also is there like is there any like notification will Azure will keep like versioning? How frequently the versioning is happening, and also this
No, it
ARM.
is. Go ahead, please.
That is one question. The second question is, all these PowerShell scripting, Terraforms, ARM forms, is this something like limiting or reducing the administration work?
Yes, to answer to your second question, yes, it is reducing the administrative effort that you have to take because now you're doing something which is reusable. So of course, it reduces the time, it reduces the amount of human intervention. Yes. Question one: how do we really know about it? By default, just go by this thumb rule. By default, any cloud vendor or any client that you work with today is working in an version 2 model only. It's an ARM model only that they really work on. But if you want to look at, let's say, whether it's a version 1 or a version 2, you just have to go inside a resource. Let's say for a storage account, if you see it is a storage account general purpose version 1, then you can say that it's a classic storage account that you have. If you, let's say, work with a, let's say, virtual machine, and under the properties of a virtual machine, it will clearly tell you whether it's a classic model or whether it's an ARM model out here. But again, in the recent past, when I say recent past, about 5 or 6 years, I've not seen people using version 1 at all. So version 1, I would say, is almost completely phased out. Even the support for version 1 is not that great out here right now.
One question I have, Kiran.
Good
So the
question.
ARM templates like Terraform,
Hmm.
does it have immutable in nature and state information and all that it maintains like Terraform, or
ARM, like
how
Terraform,
powerful?
we'll talk about that when we talk about ARM templates. We'll see what really ARM templates is and how is it different from a Terraform template out here. Because at this point, if I introduce that, it'll be a little overwhelming for people who do not really know what Terraform really is. So whether it maintains a state, we'll see that.
So this PowerShell,
Mhm.
there is this a different kind of software. Do we need to know the basics for this, or you gonna teach us like the basic things also in this, or is this covered
We'll
in the
start from the
Azure?
basics.
This?
Yes, we'll
Okay.
start from the basics. So you don't really have to, let's say, know what are the ABCs of PowerShell. Also, we'll start from the basics. Not to worry.
So Kiran, in
So
real time, we can write the script in whatever we require, or do we need a .NET Java language mandatory for this for some
well, as a
clients use?
DevOps engineer or as an administrator, you do not really need to understand the basics of, or you do not really need to know the programming languages like .NET or Java. This is something that you would not need. This is an option that I'm giving you, that if you are coming from a development background, you can also design your programs in .NET or Java based applications out there. It's something that you can do. But in a real time, when as a DevOps engineer, right, we earlier used to use a lot of PowerShell. Now it's becoming a combination of ARM and Terraforms. Terraform, I would say, is, I mean, now the portal is more tilted towards Terraform out here. And then Azure is coming up with its own, let's say, module called Azure Bicep. There's something called Bicep and a couple of things out here. So to answer your question, no, you do not need an understanding of programming. Scripting, yes. Templates,
Okay.
yes. This is
Okay.
something that you would, let's say, need an understanding about.
Bash means
So
Unix, Kiran, Bash means Unix scripting.
Shell scripting, you could say. Linux,
Okay.
something that you do on a Linux machine is called
Unix
a bash.
scripting. Okay.
so in real world, I mean, which is more popularly used, PowerShell or Python scripting?
Python scripting, again, see, you'll have to be Python again. I wouldn't say it's a scripting again. I would say it's a program. It's completely program for which you need something called as an object oriented programming language. Oops concepts should be, let's say, taught for Python and all these things out. In a real time, you are not really expected to write a Python. If you are good with PowerShell, well versed with PowerShell, that's good enough.
So whatever we automate things, right? We can also do it with Python. Python is
You can
also a
do it in
scripting language.
yes, Python, yes, I would say it's a scripting, but more of a programming side, more on a programming side out there, which follows purely object oriented programming out there. Yes, you can do .NET, Java, Python, Golang, whatever is the languages that are available out there as such. So whatever scripting that you do in PowerShell, if you are well versed with Python, you can also do the same thing in Python also. Yes, any more questions here? Okay, so let's get started with PowerShell scripting then. Let's see what do we know about PowerShell scripting. How do we get started with PowerShell scripting and so on and so forth. Again, in order to get started with something called PowerShell, you need a tool called PowerShell ISC. Again, you have something called Windows PowerShell. PowerShell 7 is something that I have installed later. But if you just type in PowerShell, you get a couple of options out here. One thing that I'm really looking at is called PowerShell ISC, Integrated Service Environment. Again, how do you install this? Very importantly, you don't really have to install this out. This comes default shipped out with your operating system. If you're using an operating system which is greater than or equal to something called as Windows 7 Service Pack 1. There's an operating system called Windows 7, and then later came Service Pack 1 and 2 and all these things out. So if you are working on a system, or if you have a laptop which has Windows 7 Service Pack 1 or later, which means Windows 7 Service Pack 1, Windows 8, Windows 8.1, Windows 10, Windows 11, everything will have something called PowerShell ISE by default installed in it. So just click on this one, and this
There
will
are two
open up.
versions, right? PowerShell ISC x86. This is 64-bit.
And this is a 64-bit operating. Yes, this is a 64. If you
Okay.
are on an operating system which is a 32, then yes, you will have to, let's say, use something called PowerShell ISE, which is, let's say,
No, I see both
x86.
options on my machine. So that's it.
Yes, go for yes. Depending upon the version of your operating system, either it's a 32-bit or a 64-bit. If it's a 64-bit operating system, go ahead with ISE. If it's a 32-bit, go ahead with x86. So when you say Windows PowerShell out here, this is what someone was talking about. There's something called ISE x86 out here. x86 is for 32-bit operating systems. So very importantly, just check what is the version of your operating system, whether it's a 32-bit or a 64-bit, and depending upon that, you can go with ISC or you can go with 86 out here. Such again, see, when you are buying a laptop with a home operating system, 90% of the times you will go with 64-bit operating systems out here. So goes without saying. So just check your versions out there again. Just see if it is WinVer. Let's see if I have something, either this one or go into your PC and just check the properties. That will tell you whether it's a 32-bit or a 64-bit operating system out here as such. So just go with this Windows PowerShell IC if it's a 64-bit operating system. And as when you open this, right, this is the screen that you get. Or in your case, you might get just a blue screen out here. Now, once you open it, you might get a blue screen out there as such. This is called as the input console, or you can call this as an editor. All this white screen that you see is just like a notepad. You can go and write things out and so on and so forth. just like a notepad out here, wherein it allows you to go ahead and write. But when I'm saying it's a script, right, you just don't want to write it, you want to execute it. When you want to execute it, you want to see the output of it, for which you get something called as an output console. So again, this is a white screen. I can split my white screen by using these buttons. Either I can split it horizontally or I can split it vertically into white screen and a blue screen out here as such. This blue screen is the output console, is the output out here, which means whatever you write here and execute, you'll be able to see the output here in, let's say, the blue screen out here, and you can split it across. You can split it whether vertically, whether horizontally, and etc. You can split this thing across, and then you can start writing your commands. You can start writing your commands out here. And the very first command that I want to do, or the very first thing that I want to do, is that I want to know what is the version of PowerShell that I'm really running on. The version of PowerShell is very important, for which I'll just put in something called $PS version table. I'll say it is $PS version table, nothing but PowerShell version table out here. And if I just say enter, right, my cursor is coming to the next line out here. I want to execute it in order to understand what is my version. What you can do is either put your cursor here or just highlight this and say, you see this button called play buttons here in the top. It's called run script and run selection. So what I'll do is I'll click on this one called run selection, and what this will do is that it will take this command, execute it out, and give me an output. So it's a table just telling me right now what is the name, what is the value, and this is what I'm really interested in, called PS version. And here the version is what, 5.1.226, something like this, right? Your version of PowerShell should be greater than or equal to 5.1. This is the version of PowerShell that you should be working with. Again, Windows 7 latest updates, Windows 10, Windows 11 by default come with this particular 5.1 out here as such. If you are using an operating system which is less than Windows 7 and do not have this version called 5.1, you'll have to do, or you'll have to run an update on your operating system. There's something called Windows updates. So you'll have to search for your Windows updates out there. So if you go into Windows updates, you'll have to check for your updates, see whether you have all the updates, let's say all the latest updates out there. And if you do not, please download and make your operating system onto something which is running a latest update out there. And since PowerShell being a part of your operating system, PowerShell is an inherent part of your operating system out here. Once you run all your updates and make your operating system or get your operating system to a latest version out there, this will make sure that you come to something called as 5.1. This is the first prerequisite that I'm giving you, is that your operating or your PowerShell that you're using, the PowerShell IC that you're using, should be running on something which is greater than or equal to 5.1 out here as such. This is the first condition out here as such. So let's do one thing. If I want to clear something in that output screen, I'll just type in a command called CLS, clear screen out here, say enter, which will erase whatever is there in your output console. So useful because over a period of time, right, you'll be executing a lot of things. There'll be a lot of things out there. You might want to clear it out. So I just cleared this out and I have a clean window right now. And what I want to do is that I just want to write something called as hello world. I just want to do something like hello world out here. And if I execute this one, if I want to execute this line, what do I do, guys, to execute this line? Where should I go? In this one. What happens if I click on this? This
No,
is
it will.
called run script. Sorry, go ahead,
You
please.
need to select the. You need to select that portion, right?
You don't really need to select the portion again. Again, selecting a portion is one of the options. If you just want to execute the entire line, you can
The
just
play
put your
button.
cursor on this line and then you can execute this out. So it will just execute that single line or that particular line where your cursor is there. If you click on this one, right, it will execute every line all the lines out here. 1, 2, 3. You have 3 lines out here. It will execute everything out there. So it is called run script versus run selection. Selection is just this one, where your cursor is. So if I put my cursor here and say execute this out, it's telling hello world, it's executing, and then it is giving me an error telling me that hello, the term hello is not a recognized, or it's not recognized as a name of a commandlet function script or an operable program. It's telling, you know what, you are giving me in plain English, I don't understand what you want me to do. What I wanted PowerShell to do very simply is that just print out something called hello world. That's it. I just wanted to print out something called hello world. But you cannot just type it in a simple English. You have to give it something known as a command. A command what PowerShell really recognizes. So in order to print an output, I'll just say CLS to clear this out. In order to print an output out here, what I'll do is I'll firstly remove this out, and I'll now start writing a command called write hyphen host. I'll say write hyphen host space in quotations. Okay, hello. I'll give it in quotations. So now telling PowerShell that, you know what, I want you to go ahead and print a statement called hello world out here in your output console. And if I now select this out, or if I just keep my cursor here and execute this out, I'm not getting an error, but I'm getting an output called what? Hello world out here. Again, there are two things that's coming here. One is your input, and after the input, it's processing the input and then giving you an output in the form of something called hello world out here. Let's say you are very bored about this color. Just let's say plain, let's say white out here. You want to change the color of your font while you're printing it out. Let's do that. I'll say write host hello world, and after giving that, I can now pass something called as arguments to my script. There's something called arguments, which are optional in nature, which means that if I now want PowerShell to change the color, I'll say hyphen foreground color, background color or foreground color. I'll say space. It will automatically sorry, it will automatically load the let's say the colors that are available. Let's say something like blue, but blue mixes out. So let's say something like yellow. And now print this out. Now if I want to run this, the color of the output is now changing. The color of what I'm outputting here is now changing, telling that it is hello world out here as such. So this is if you are coming from a C program, if you have any time done C program or something like that. This is something called as a printf in C. There's something called printf in C. It's equivalent to printf in C out here as such. But again, if you're not familiar with any programming, not a problem at all. This command is just used to go ahead and let's say print an output statement out here as such out there. Any
So
questions still here?
these commands are case sensitive.
Commands are case sensitive, not really. For example, if I do a write host again in an uppercase too, it will still work.
Now, if I use, let's say,
It works.
all lowercase, also it should work, right?
Not a
It
problem. Yes,
automatically
it
will
works.
take the function when we write, right?
Yes, that's true. So not all are case sensitive out here. Yes. Any questions still here? It will show default. Yes, but you will have to let's say type this out and say hyphen. It will load this out. It's called IntelliSense. Called as an IntelliSense in PowerShell, which will tell you or which will give you some suggestion telling what is write host, what is write event log, and all that stuff. That's one thing. I now want to go ahead write a couple of statements. What I'll do is that I'll just remove these two things out here. I'll say write host, and I'll type in something like is from Hyderabad. I've typed a statement. In the next line, I want to type something like write host. Kiran loves watching movies. In the next line, I would say write host. Kiran goes out. Something like this. Some statements out here as such. If you see that particular word, right, or that this particular name called Kiran is being repeated again and again. And if I want to now execute this out, I'll just select everything, or simply I'll go ahead and say execute this particular script. So what it's doing right now is that until here was your input, when I'm telling Kiran, right host Kiran is from Hyderabad, right host Kiran loves watching movies, right host Kiran goes out, and here this is typing the output for me. Whatever I've given in the input format, it's now typing this in the form of an output. It's telling, okay, fine, Kiran is from Hyderabad, Kiran loves watching movies, Kiran goes out, and all that stuff. Let's say now your requirement is slightly changed. It is not Kiran, it is Suresh that you want to, let's say, put in. 3 lines, what I can do? I can say Suresh. I can say Suresh here. I can say Suresh here. Do this. I can just go ahead and do this out here. Good enough, but it's easier for me to replace that particular word in three lines. What if you want to replace the same thing in, let's say, 300 lines, 300,000 lines? It becomes a little difficult for you. So let me put Kiran back in. Meaning, instead of using an actual name here, I can replace this particular name with something known as a variable. Yes, variables. That's what I'm coming down to, called variables. So I'll just put a hash here. A hash means a comment. If I want to write a comment in PowerShell, I'll just put a hash and I'll say variables. This is a
Hello, sir.
command. Just a second. Just a second. Let me complete. I'll come back to you. This is a command. This is a comment. The difference between those two, commands are executable. Comments are not. Which means that if I remove this, right, this is now treated as a command. If I now execute this, error telling that variables is not a recognized command written, etc. If I put it, or if I put a hash here, it's now treated as a comment. And if I now just execute this out, no errors, because PowerShell is not treating this as a command. It's telling you, okay, fine, you just commented it out, so I'll just ignore this. And in order to declare a variable in PowerShell is something like this. Any variable in PowerShell starts with a dollar. Starts with a dollar. For example, I'll say dollar name is equal to this. With dollar name, I'll say it's equal to Suresh. The dollar name is now equal to Suresh out here right now. And what I can do is that instead of writing something like Kiran is from Hyderabad, Kiran loves watching movies, I can replace this with dollar name. Dollar name out here. Dollar name. What happens right now is this. If I just go ahead and execute this out right now, do you see what is the input right now? All these three are the input statements, which is telling dollar name is from Hyderabad, dollar name loves watching movies and etc. And while executing it, Official understood that dollar name is equal to Suresh. It replaced that dollar name with what? Suresh, Suresh, and Suresh. Now, if I want to, let's say, change it back to Kiran, I don't have to go into each and every line and change this. Either I can just come here. Instead of saying it as Suresh, I'll say it as Kiran. I'll just execute this out here. Saying now Kiran is from Hyderabad, Kiran loves watching movies, Kiran goes out, and so on and so forth. This is what I can do by using a variable. Again, I'm not telling what is the use case of it. I'm telling what is a variable. We'll talk about how is it used in your scripts and etc. while you go inside the scripts. But very importantly, you need to understand the basics of it to, let's say, understand how things really work in PowerShell. So let's understand the basics and let's go ahead and, let's say, see what are different types of, let's say, data types and all these things out here as such. Yes, I'll just take a quick pause. I heard someone had a question. Yes.
Kiran, in
Uh,
that variable we have written, right, 6, 7, row number 6, 7, 8.
mhm.
Can't we open the single quote after the variable? The variable should also be in the double quotes itself.
You can open the, I mean, you can open it. You can do this.
Yeah, like that.
Yes, you can do this. Still works. You can still do this.
Okay.
So if I just execute this out too, it'll still work. Shouldn't be a problem, but not a best practice. Not a best practice to place a variable outside the, let's say the quote out here. It's better to place it inside a quote.
Okay.
Hello,
Good, please.
sir. Right host is must and should. Sir, any any write and print.
Sorry, can you come again, please?
Any write and print. Any print. Write host
Yes,
is must and should.
yes. As
Okay.
in, if you just give a quote, it'll still work. But again, there are cases where it won't understand your let's say cases and all that stuff. That's where it will fail. So I would say it's good to have a right host. It's good to have something called right host in front of your statements out here as such.
Can we suppress the input and show only the output, or is it
Can
mandatory
you
that we
suppress
need?
the input and show only the output? Yes, you can do that, provided you save your scripts. Provided you
Okay.
save your scripts and then run your scripts, then yes, that is possible. I'll also show the
Like
same thing.
right, like dot slash a ps1, something like that.
Yes, something like this. So if I want to save this, right, I'll just say Control S to save this out. And let me take a folder in my system. Let me go here into, let's say, one of the folders out here. I'll say PowerShell class 1. And in here, I'll just go ahead save this file as intro.ps1. The .ps1 file. PowerShell is always a .ps1 file out here. I'll just save. And now if I just execute this out, do you see what's now happening? I'm not getting the input. I'm only getting the output. So it's just executing all the input in the background and just giving me the output. If you don't save it, that's what I mean. If you don't really save this out, it will give you both the input and the output out here as such.
So if you are in that location, I mean, we need to run dot slash intro dot ps1, right? I think
No, you
that's
don't
okay.
have to. Again, I just clicked on the let's say run script, right? So it just went into the location and got the script. So I'm already, let's say, on that particular script location out here. I will open the script so it understands where is the script really located. So I took the entire location and ran this out.
No, no, that is fine. I mean, if I want to, let's
Mhm,
say, execute only the script, but I'm in a
mhm.
in that location where the script is saved, right? For example.
Okay. Okay. So you are
So
in the
then, if
location
I
where the script is saved. So yes, then you can do a
correct
dot backslash. So for
dot,
example,
yeah, correct,
if yes, so the
that's fine.
question here is that if I'm in the location, can I execute the script directly? Yes. So for which I'll just take this location, and if I want to go into that location, I'll just cd change directory, and always better to give it in quotes because sometimes you might have spaces in your, let's say, location out here which will throw up an error. I'll say enter. Now I'm into, let's say, this particular path called E something like this. Now if I want to execute my script directly out here, I'll call my script by telling dot backslash. If I do a dot backslash, it will tell you what are all the files in a particular directory. I'll take this and I'll say enter. Same thing. Either you take the script, run this out, or you come here, do, let's say, a dot backslash and run this out. It's one and the same thing out here as such.
Kiran, what is the extension of this file, Kiran? It's a batch script, similar to the DOS command, the DOS script
Uh,
from.
it is not similar to DOS command. I mean, it does have a lot of familiarity with, let's say, DOS because each and every language that you see, right, it's developed from a DOS out there. Uh, but this is now a PowerShell module, meaning there are classes, meaning the entire PowerShell, right? It is developed on top of .NET, so it follows very closely with the .NET class. So it's not purely a bash out there. It can only run on Windows. This particular module of PowerShell IC can only run on Windows out there. So I would say this itself is like a PowerShell. I mean, this itself is a class and a module within itself. that is developed on top of .NET.
Always the extension will be, the file type will be ps1 dot ps1 dot
It's a
ps1.
PS1 file. That's correct.
So Kiran, we don't need a data types for this variable declaration, like directly we can
We
declare the variable and use it. That's it.
as in we do need a data type declaration. We do need to specify explicitly if the data type changes. Meaning for a string, I mean this is a string. I will talk about what is string arrays and all these things. We'll also look at what sorry. We'll also look at the data type declarations out there as such.
Okay, okay.
So you have taken Kiran as an example, right? So if there are three different names in the three different lines, so
Mhm. There are three different names in three different lines. In that case, you either need to run a loop. You either need to, let's say, tell us that, you know what, I need a loop out here, or you need to approach it the manual way. Name one, name two, and name three. Manual way is something that I do not really suggest, but I'm also giving you an example out here. Let's say you have three names out here, and you just want to, let's say, go ahead print out three lines out there. So you can say it is fish, something else, XYZ. And if I want to just use this the way it is, say 1 and 3, and if I just execute this out in a very manual way, says Kiran is from Hyderabad, Suresh loves watching movies, XYZ goes out, or XYZ is like, goes out, and so on and so forth. In a very manual way, in a very manual world, yes, this kind of works, but we'll also see how to automate this out here as such.
And does it follows any strict indentation, or we can write it in the
No,
freestyle format?
it's the freestyle format, doesn't really follow a strict indentation, but when you do a write host, you cannot do a write, then do a space, and then say host. You cannot do this.
No, after
This is a
write
problem.
host,
Yes.
so we need to give a blank, right? White space.
You need to give white space. Again, if I don't even do that, if I just say, let's see if this works.
If I don't give any space at all, I mean, we can also check
yes,
that,
see, if
right?
you see, it's failing out here, right? So it needs it needs a single space out here. So if you don't give a
Okay.
space, let's also see that.
It's a syntax error.
It's a syntax error. Again, if you see this, it's again a syntax error out here. So yes, uh, this thing needs one single space, one single white space out here as such. Yes, any more questions? Okay, fine. Why is it not okay? Let's say okay, fine. I also wrote the statement wrong.
Right,
Spelling
right
was
Yes,
spelling is
wrong.
wrong.
yes. Let's see this. Let's see if this works really. It does. It does. It does work out. Earlier, I had issue with my right host. This is something that I did not
Can
see.
can you also
Hmm?
test with removing the blank space at all?
Removing the blank space, I think it will now throw an error for you because
I think,
this
yeah,
now follows a
because it's a
syntax. So
command and
yes,
you
it's a
should
command.
differentiate it.
So it's differentiating between what is a command and what is your,
Okay,
let's say, argument out here as such.
got it, got it.
Any more questions, guys? So again, I don't want to put again. I understand the fact that a lot of people might not be from a programming background. So I did not really want to, let's say, go ahead and do a deep dive into PowerShell. That's something that I'll do it from tomorrow and day after, and we'll continue the session over the weekends out there. So that's the plan that we do have. So initially, I'll be starting with Windows PowerShell. All that I'm doing right now is a Windows command, Windows PowerShells out there. Once we are done with Windows PowerShell, once we understand what Windows PowerShell is, how do you, let's say, use PowerShell objects and etc., we'll go into Azure PowerShell, meaning using the same logics, using the same understanding. How do I apply the same thing onto an Azure portal? And this this requires a decent amount of time because I'll have to go at a very slow pace. I'll have to, let's say, moderate my pace in such a way. At least in the initial sessions, I'll have to make sure that everyone follows what I'm really talking about because the basics are very important, guys. I understand the fact that you might not know what is a data type. So that's the reason when someone is asking a question about data types and etc., I'm being a little careful about not really exposing that concept out here right away because it will confuse you a little. So I'm making sure to come from the very basic. So what I need is this. So today is like 12th. So 13th and 14th will be doing PowerShell, and also 15th, sorry, Sorry, not 12th. Yes, it's 12th, right? Okay, fine. 15th and 16th also will be doing PowerShells out there. But 15th and 16th will go 2 hours of a session. So it'll be from, let's say, probably 8 to 10 or something like that, or 7 to 9. Anything that is good
Yeah,
enough for you all.
I think 7 to 9 should be good.
Sure. I mean, yes, I'll take opinion on that. Let's see. I mean, I'm good to do 7 to 9. I'm flexible with that. Or I can do 8 to 10. Anything is okay. And we'll take a lot of questions out there on what PowerShell really is and etc. And from Monday, right, which is on 17th, we'll again come back to the theory. We'll understand what are virtual networks and all these things. And then on the weekends, we'll be doing automation. So it's a weekend. I mean, I would need about 3 or 4 weekends out there like that in order to just tell you what automation really is. Again, the promise here, guys, is that see, I'll be able to give you a basic and an intermediate knowledge, but to master a language, right, you'll have to do a lot of practice. So I'll also suggest some YouTube channels and where do you watch, how do you practice it, and etc. And I'll be giving a lot of requirements on, let's say, what do I really need, and we'll try to do assignments out there and we'll take the questions out of that particular assignment. That will help you understand what really PowerShell is. Again, again, I'm not promising that you'll become a master after this particular class of PowerShell, because that's something which I cannot really promise on, because it's a strict practice, guys. It's like any other language. Like, you know English. How do you know English? Because you've been practicing it over the years, right? PowerShell is also a language. It's a language which needs a good amount of practice. So we'll try to put a good amount of practice because, see, to be very honest with y'all, when you work in a real-time environment, 80% of your work will be on some kind of an automation, either being ARM templates or Terraforms or PowerShell out there as such. So keeping that in mind, we'll see how do we practice this and so on and so forth.
One last question, Kiran. We
Good,
out
please.
of out of what we are
Hmm?
discussing. So the
Good,
variables,
please.
can we put it in a different file and source it as a path to that file
Yes,
in
yes, you
PowerShell?
can do that.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
you can do that. You can use something known as modules in PowerShell for that
Module. Okay.
module. So if you want to do a module, right, you'll have to save the file as a .psm1. So you can import a module,
PSM1.
and from that module, you can go ahead and, let's say, use all these variables out here as such.
Oh, M for module, PSM1. Okay.
Yes, it's a PSM1 file. I'll also show you how the modules are imported and how do we use those things and so on and so forth.
Sure, sure.
Okay, so that's it from mine today, guys. We'll meet tomorrow. We'll
And
continue our
one last
discussion with PowerShell.
question.
Go ahead, please.
Last
Sorry.
question.
Good, good, please.
And what is managed identity? Managed identity required in real time.
Ramakrishna, I'm sorry. Your voice is a little muffled. Can you please come again, please?
Manage identity. I have learned something called manage identity.
Mhm.
It is required in real time. Manage identity.
Uh, yes, I'll talk about that. I'll talk about what really managed entity really, how it works and all these things while we talk about Azure PaaS services. So it
Okay.
fits in something called as PaaS services. I'll talk about managed entity there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
guys.
So